I'm really, really delighted to introduce you to a woman who I've heard about for many years. We have a close relationship with Eating Recovery Centers of America. They've supported us at our conventions over the years, and we've done some events, virtual events together. And so I've heard about Kara, and so I'm really just delighted to have her with us today. So Kara is going to be speaking about stopping the cycle of binge eating disorder. Kara says, live life and love it. The true joy in life is living it without fear, reservation, or compromise. There was a time when Kara.Richardson.Whitely was stuck waiting for happiness to arrive. It took her years to realize the irony of it all. Happiness was always right there, and it was waiting on her. Kara stopped her cycle of binge eating disorder and discovered a life of endless possibilities. She is now an author, public speaker, and adventurer. She's also the National Binge Eating Disorder Recovery Advocate for Eating Recovery Center. Kara took on Africa's highest peak 3 times and wrote Gorge, My Journey Up Kilimanjaro at 300 pounds and the Weight of Being. Gorge is being made into a major, I'm so excited about this. I didn't know this till the other day. Gorge is being made into a major motion picture by Amazon Studios starring Chrissy Metz, who plays Kate on This Is Us. So Chrissy will be producing and starring as Kara. Kara has been featured in the New York Times and on Good Morning America, The Today Show, CBS The Talk, and countless other media outlets. Kara, I'm so delighted to speak with you, and I'm so excited to hear about Gorge being turned into a film. So how wonderful. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here at She Recovers. I had admired this organization for so long, and it's a delight. I think one of the gifts of this time is being able to talk with organizations without ever having to leave my home. And so that allows us to connect with way more people, even if it's not the in-person kind of touchy-feely that we're so used to, but at least we're here now. So thank you. I'm grateful. I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see some slides and have some images of my journey. I want to first, as a caveat, say that the name of my presentation is Stopping the Cycle of Binge Eating Disorder. But I also want to acknowledge that, these are strange times that we are in right now, and they're hard. They're really hard. And so when I give talks, for example, once a month, I do Shining a Light on Recovery. I want to acknowledge that stopping the cycle of binge eating disorder can be just for a minute. It could be for a day. It could be for a week. It doesn't, stopping isn't the end all be all, and the road to recovery from whatever you're recovering from is ongoing. It is a journey. And so the title of this presentation, Stopping the Cycle of Binge Eating Disorder, is just almost like taking a different journey from it rather than just stopping, because I feel like too often we think that the work of recovery begins and ends in some kind of program, but the real work of it is the journey that we have ahead of us. And so today I invite you to my story, and I invite you also to take what you need from it, being that, do you just need an armchair adventure right now, or do you have the travel bug that you just can't get rid of right now and you want to go anywhere? So in your mind, come with me to Kilimanjaro. Or do you need to take something from it from the binge eating perspective? Do you need to understand the most common and yet least talked about eating disorder out there? This is the beginning of National Eating Disorders Awareness Week. And so it's a really important time for us to talk about all sorts of eating disorders, and knowing that eating disorders cuts across all genders, all backgrounds, everything. And so that's why I'm so especially grateful to talk today about this. But, sometimes people from my presentations get a glimmer of hope or a bit of insight of what obstacles are in your life and how you might move mountains to make them happen. So with that, I will share my screen and we'll get going. Also, I just want to mention that there are 2 beautiful, wonderful hosts are from Canada, and I grew up in Canada, so you might hear a little bit of the Canadian in me coming back with my accent, but I'm based in Summit, New Jersey for the moment. The reason I share my story so openly and so broadly is that I think stopping the cycle of binge eating disorder begins by taking away its shame and power. I wrote 2 books that have been published by a publisher, plus one other that I self-published. But the most important thing that I had to learn as a writer was to put everything on the table, knowing that it didn't matter what I shared with the world, because someone else would be nodding their head. Someone else would be feeling like they understand. And whether their relationship with food was something they wanted to work on, or with their body, or with anything else that was holding them back, the more that I shared and the more I took away shame and secrecy from my experience, the better of a writer that I became, but also the stronger I became in my recovery. Because writing, I was a journalist for a decade. Writing was always my strongest point in school. Writing was my superpower in recovery. Anytime I put a word on the page, it didn't just exist here in my heart. It became part of my existence that was able to be shared with the world. So what I've written about over time has changed in name and shape. Way back when I started, not way back, gosh, that makes me feel very old. Way back when I started writing, I called my relationship with food and my disordered eating many different things. I've called it food addiction. I've called it compulsive overeating, emotional eating. What I don't call it anymore is an issue of willpower and weight. What I've learned over the years, and you'll even see on the back of, Gorge, they even call it food addiction. I didn't even have a name, a true name or diagnosis for what I was experiencing. It only was a handful of years ago that binge eating disorder became a true diagnosis in the DSM-5. And so now healthcare practitioners have an actual thing to call this and to diagnose someone with binge eating disorder. And I think it's something like 3 times as many people with bulimia and anorexia combined have binge eating disorder, and yet people don't really talk about it. And I think that's because, there has been such an emphasis on diet culture, this idea that it's all just eat less, move more. It's so simple. Look, it's so easy. I could do it. I could lose this amount in this amount of time. And that message has been pushed and pushed and pushed, especially in the healthcare community, that this is the simple solution, when people don't realize that inside people are really struggling from a mental illness, from something that has steps to recovery to help with. And so they saw it as just this idea of willpower and weight versus an actual eating disorder. So just to give you the hallmarks of somebody who, maybe someone or maybe yourself are struggling with this, the hallmarks of binge eating disorder are eating more rapidly than normal, eating until feeling uncomfortably full, eating large amounts of food even when not physically hungry, and eating alone due to feeling how embarrassed one is with eating, and feeling disgusted with oneself when depressed, or guilty after eating. And so I myself am not a healthcare professional. And if any of those spoke to you, or someone might be speaking, it's really important to talk to a mental health professional about that, and to see if maybe this is something of what you're going through. But those are the hallmarks. Those are the things we talk about that people may be experiencing, but not realizing that binge eating disorder is something that's real and diagnosable. So I've written about climbing Kilimanjaro 3 times, and people get kind of stuck and fixated on that story. But it's important to understand where this journey began. And from the optics of it, when someone looked at me at the point when I was truly, really, really struggling with binge eating disorder, they may just see someone in a larger body and not understand, how could somebody let themselves go to that point? How could somebody be at the point where even walking up a flight of stairs looked like Everest to me? I could barely make it up a flight of stairs. The only mountains that I traversed were by train, not by my own feet, and not really understanding the narrative. So the question is, how does somebody get there? And for me, it was a series of traumas. an eating disorder, any kind of addiction can be lit off by so many different things, right? But my story is that, I, at age 9, it even starts before. I was burned as a baby at age 9. My parents went through this terrible divorce. I was sexually assaulted on my 12th birthday. And the only consistent thing for me as a kid was food. The only thing that took away the sting, the trauma, the fact that I didn't want to talk about these things with other people was food. In fact, food was the thing that got me out of the worst situation, which was being sexually assaulted. I actually offered the guy something to eat in the midst of it. It was the only thing that I could think about. Food in my mind as a 12-year-old girl saved me. So it makes sense that growing up, that's the thing I kept turning to again and again and again for comfort, for healing, to take away the sting of the loneliness, to take away the burn of feeling like I didn't have a real peer group because people shunned me because of my larger body. I didn't fit into the clothes. There was a tremendous amount of isolation, which continued to feed the eating disorder. My feelings like I didn't belong, my feelings like I shouldn't be in my body, or I didn't deserve to exist in the space of the world. And I certainly didn't deserve to go on these kinds of adventures. And so one of the hallmarks of change, and there have been many turning points in my journey along the way. So I don't want you to think of this next part of my story as like, oh, this is your Oprah aha moment, right? This is when everything changed, right? One of my turning points was when I got an adventure travel catalog in the mail. It was one of those magazines that had beautiful pictures of Machu Picchu, Kilimanjaro, and the Alps. And I got it and I said to myself, I'm going to do that when I lose weight. And I started to realize as I was approaching 30 years old that everything was followed by that clause. I'm going to buy myself a whole new wardrobe when I lose weight. Like I had these whole diary entries of all the things I was going to do if I lost a certain amount of pounds, promises that I make to myself. I'd say to myself, I'll go to the doctors when I lose weight. And I can't tell you how many people out there have said that to me, during presentations across the country or corporations. I'll go to the doctors when I lose weight. And I'd say to myself, I'll go on these adventures when I lose weight. And I started to realize the time is ticking by. It's going to go by whether or not I lost weight. And so how can I start to go on this journey of doing the things that I actually want to do without that part of the sentence? One of the challenges that I face, that other people in larger bodies face, is that we don't fit the mold. This is an actual Google search. This is an actual Google search of hiker girl, images that fit the mold of what a hiker girl is. Now, first of all, the woman on the top right, I mean, she's got to go to the gear shop like straight away, right? She's got to get herself some good gear. But most of them are scantily clad, hiking in a jogging bra, and I did not fit this image of what a hiker girl looked like, the marketing that was associated. And so from the beginning, I felt like I didn't belong. It was intimidating to go out in the woods when I couldn't even buy the clothing that hiker girls were supposed to wear, right? Even the socks were too tight at many of the stores when I started hiking. The only thing that I could relate to in all these images was what the woman in the bottom right was carrying. That's what I could go to my local outdoor store and purchase, a water bottle. Because I started to think about, well, what does a hiker girl look like? What kind of behaviors do I need to start, blending in with? And I remembered at the University of Vermont, where I went to school, all the people who look like fresh from the trail, they all carried around these Nalgene bottles, the kind of water bottles that if you and the water bottle fell off the side of the cliff, it would survive and you wouldn't. I figured if I could carry around one of those, then at least I could start fitting the mold. And it was incredibly intimidating to have my first steps in the woods I also got myself a book, The 50 Hikes of New Jersey. And I started with one that was very close to my house, which is Watchung Reservation. They have this 20-minute trail, right? And it's the kind of trail that a preschool class could do as a day trip. But me, I was suited up like I was going up Everest. My backpack was full of compasses, bear whistles, all the things that could possibly go wrong. And I think, I learned an expression when I was hiking the long trail this summer in Vermont. Someone said, "You pack your fears." And on this first hike, I carried with me anything that could possibly go wrong because I was starting something new. And my binge eating disorder is completely dovetailed with my depression and my anxiety. And so I carry with me on any activity, any new thing that I'm going to do, any adventure, those things. And it like manifested itself literally in my backpack in that first hike. But what I also learned in that first hike is that how much nature helped me with those things. You see, I used binging as a way of pushing away the joy, pushing away the everything that came along with life, right? The good, the bad, the everything in between. I was comfortably numb all the time with food. But when I stepped into nature, I was consumed. I was consumed by the canopy and everything that was around me. I was consumed by the idea that, like, I didn't know what was going to happen on the trail. I didn't know what was coming. Sure, you've got apps now like Gut Hook that help kind of map you, and the incline that's coming, but you didn't know exactly what it looks like. You don't know how your body is going to react on it. All you know is that you have to keep trudging forward. It might be uncomfortable. It might be unsavory conditions. The weather might turn, but it also might lead you to some of the most beautiful and most wondrous places that you could ever possibly go to. And so I continued to hike. From that 20-minute hike, I went to the top of Camel's Hump, which is this mountain in Vermont that I once had tried to get to the top of, but couldn't. I went to the bottom of the Grand Canyon and thankfully back up again without the assistance of a mule. I went to the top of Mount Mansfield, which to this day in Vermont is the hardest hike I've ever done, not because of the actual mountain, but because we went down the wrong side of the mountain. So it's as much of a story about climbing a mountain as it is about keeping a marriage alive, because my husband was the one who decided to go a certain way. And so as I was hiking, I started to feel great. I started being on the serotonin is pumping in my brain. I'm moving with purpose, and I've unlocked this value in my life. I gave myself permission to start going down this path, because before it was like I wasn't worthy. I didn't belong. And now suddenly I did. I was taking steps in places that people in larger bodies didn't go. I allowed myself to feel joy that for so long, I hadn't even touched or gotten close to before. And because I'm feeling really good and I start to make choices about food that fuel me, but don't push down emotions. And the thing that starts happening is that I start to lose weight. I start to lose a tremendous amount of weight, the kind of weight that everybody has to make a comment about. Everybody's got to say something, and it's so uncomfortable. It's so weird, because before people didn't even look me in the eye, right? Because I was in a larger body and there's a lot of fat phobia and fat shaming and all these other things that were happening in my own workplace. And now they're following me to the bathroom and asking me, "What are you doing? Did you do this diet or that diet or whatever?" So I needed a way to, as my therapist in the past would say, to reframe, because it started to make me not want to hike and not want to do the things that I wanted to do. But I did have this really big mountain on the horizon in my mind. It was Kilimanjaro. Kilimanjaro is 19,343 feet, but who's counting? It is 5.5 days up, 1.5 days down, all without a shower, so not for everybody. And the air at the top, there's half as much oxygen at the top of the mountain as there is at sea level. So this is a really, really big challenge. And it's on a lot of people's life lists. So much so that nonprofits have really taken it on as an opportunity to raise money for them, because you're doing this enormous feat. And so you can sign up to do it to raise money for diabetes awareness and whatever kind of organization that you want to. Cancers, research, whatever. And so I wanted to do it to raise money for AIDS orphans in Africa. I was a big fan of U2 and Bono, and he talked a lot about that. So I found an organization that hosted climbs that would raise money. And so I signed up, and now anytime someone asked me about my weight and what I was doing and all those things like that, I could say to them, well, actually, I'm climbing Kilimanjaro to raise money for AIDS orphans and in Africa, and here's the donation sheet. So to give you an idea how many questions and how people needed to make comments about this journey of mine, my husband and I raised more than $12,000 with that strategy. So reframing works. So hold on a second. Let's see, there we go. So this enormous journey, it's more than 50 miles of hiking, really mirrors my own journey to wellness, to recovery. But nothing is such a perfect match, a perfect mirror image than Summit Night. Summit Night is 15 hours of hiking. Again, who's counting? Because you go up to the peak of the mountain and then you climb halfway down. And in this moment, you open from the beginning of it, you start right around midnight, because if you've got that much hiking to do, you might as well start in the middle of the night. There's some logistical reasons too. The wind is usually calmer, and the scree-like surface, which is like glorified kitty litter, is frozen into place, at least a little bit. And so you start this journey. First of all, the biggest accomplishment, and you really should get some kind of adulting sticker or medal for this, is putting on all your gear, because there's not very much oxygen. You can't think right. And you've got layer upon layer on top. And if you can bend down and tie your boots at the same time, well, that alone, good job. So you open your tent door, and there are stars above you, there are stars beside you, there are stars below you. It is to this day the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. Because you've come that far in your previous days of hiking. You've endured everything from headaches to all the kinds of discomfort that one gets from being in high altitude. But now you're going to climb through the dark with your comrades, the people who you've come up the mountain this far with. And you start to walk in formation. 1, 2, 1, 2. On Kilimanjaro, pole pole is this expression that you hear again and again and again. It means slowly, slowly. You put one foot in front of the other. It's like a wedding march pace. And you start to hike, and it's beautiful because the porters and the guides are singing you Swahili love songs and lullabies. And it's amazing for the first hour, maybe the second. But by the third hour, you're starting to question a lot of life choices, like, why am I not the kind of person who books a beach vacation? Why wouldn't I just go to Disneyland instead of this horrible mountain? By hour 4, you're ready to ditch every single person there. Everyone who's come along. Doesn't matter if they've lent you snacks or toilet paper in your hour of need, you are going to leave them on the side of the mountain and go down and look for a hot shower and an unopened bottle of water, because by that point, the water sources are a little bit sketchy. And right when you've gotten this point, right when you've got that I quit speech in your head completely memorized and you're ready to deliver it because you swear the porters and guides are completely lost. You have no idea where they are taking you. Unlike hiking in New Jersey, there aren't all these trail markers and things along the way to point you in those right directions. You're cursing their names. You're yelling at them, even though they're so kind to take you up the mountain. All you want to do at this point is give up. You question every single move they make. But right at that point, right when you're about to give up. You can't take this one more second. It's too uncomfortable. It's too painful. The sun rises and you can see how far you've come. You can see every move that those people, those porters, those guides, those professionals, what they were trying to get you to do and think and move through, it all made sense. It all made sense along the way. And so you get to Uhuru Peak. Uhuru Peak in Swahili, Uhuru means freedom. I thought, okay, I've got this. I'm in control of my body. I know what to do now. I just need to be this hiker girl. And so when I came back to work, all these people had all these new questions for me. It was, what's your next adventure? What are you going to do next? And I had a whole other adventure in mind. It required a whole new set of gear, and that was becoming a mom. What I didn't realize about that process is that I had work to do. You know, the weight was coming off. I thought I had this whole thing licked. What I didn't understand is that there was a whole mental health professional component of it that I really needed to work through, because during that 9-month pregnancy, I put on more than half of the weight that I had lost. But more disturbingly, it came back in the form of a vengeful mental illness, where the isolation of being a new mom, the sleep deprivation, which I've now learned is one of my biggest triggers, came in. I mean, deprivation is a form of torture, for crying out loud. You know, the circling of my kitchen, just the constant saturation. I mean, this is the time where everybody thought, well, this is this golden time of being a new mom. And it was the time when I felt the most sick with binge eating disorder, even though I had this gorgeous, wonderful new child in my life. I've never felt more sick than I did at that time. I thought for sure that this was okay. Well, I'm just, I just need to go back to the mountain, and I'm not going to give you any spoiler alerts for Gorge if you're going to read it or not. I did all these. I thought for sure it was about like, working for a cause that was bigger than myself. I did all these challenges for charity, including climbing Kilimanjaro a second time. But one of the most painful things that I learned in that second climb was that I had really not worked on my binging and figuring out how to rebuild myself inside to have the coping skills for the stress of life, because that's what it comes down to. For so long, I've been told that it's about willpower and weight and just hiking and moving, and that's not what it's about for me. What I had to learn after that second climb, because I binged right before that second climb, so spoiler alert, that climb did not go well. I had to learn how to deal with the stress of life. That meant working with healthcare providers, looking at my self-worth, how to have difficult conversations, how to take time for me personally to de-stress, debrief, to understand where is this coming from and where do I go with it. And that was the hardest work that came after that second climb, when I thought I was never going to hike again. After getting a series of emails from my friend Sally and from my cousin-in-law Stacy about climbing Kilimanjaro, they both said, we'll go if you climb with us. And so I decided that I was going to think about it. And so here these people were wanting to climb the mountain and willing to raise money for Global Alliance for Africa, the organization that I had climbed the mountain for. Together, they would be able to climb, because they were bringing one more person. They would be able to raise more than $30,000 for Global Alliance for Africa if I came along. And so I started to ask myself, how can I say no? How can I say no to this amazing adventure, this chance of redemption for myself, when the other climb ended so terribly wrong? But the question became, how do I say yes? And the way that I said yes was to double down on working on my own mental health, but also remembering that climbing the mountain wasn't some kind of punishment, Being in nature wasn't some kind of punishment. Being in nature was what fills my cup. Being in nature is the source of my joy, my values. And so I was going to train from where I was. And also, for too long, I had decided, I had said to myself, oh, I hate this part of my body. And so I'm going to do this program, or I'm going to stop doing this because I hate the way it feels. But I needed to remember the love of why I started in the first place. And the most important thing for me was to love where I was and go from there, to love nature and go from there, to love my body and go from there. And that was one of the most important steps that I took before taking on that climb. So it all went well the first few days. In fact, after 10 hours of hiking on that second day, I was feeling pretty tired, but super strong, because two of the people in our group started to feel sick. And I started to wonder, my gosh, like, I'm really killing it here. That was until I went to my tent, and the people in the tent that was next to me were the porters and guides. And I could hear them laughing in a way that I really, really recognize. I heard them using the words Mama Kubwa, which is my Swahili nickname, by the way. When I climbed the mountains, they called me Mama Kubwa, which means big woman. But they weren't laughing in a nice way. They were laughing in a way that I've heard ever since I was in middle school, where people were making fun of me. And it didn't matter what language they were speaking. I knew that they were tearing me apart. And I wanted to leave. I had 3 more days of hiking up that mountain and 1.5 days of hiking down it. But at that point, I wanted to get my headlamp on and get out of there. But I kept trudging through it in my mind. I got myself a mantra which allowed me to go to sleep. But the next day, it was still with me. This feeling like nobody thinks I belong here, that I should just get out while I'm ahead, and forget this feeling that these people absolutely doubt my existence on the mountain. So we're hiking and I'm stumbling. I mean, I'm really stumbling. All I can be is in my head. I can't be on the mountain. And then I remembered, sometimes recovery is about having difficult conversations and saying that you belong in this space, asserting your self-worth upon the world. And so during a break, I took our head guide aside and I said, hey, last night I heard you talking about me. And I asked him, what were you saying? And he said, well, the porters and the guides, they don't believe that you can make it to the top. And in that moment, the clarity of day, the clear mountain air, and the fact that I was free from binging in that moment, my head was as strong as it ever was. I said, well, did you make any money bets? Because you should. Bet on me. Bet on me. It was this assertion, this moment, was such a turning point for me in asking for what I need at any given time, that I have permission to say what I need and permission to be where I want to be. It was a turning point because, on Kilimanjaro, if you're too cold, you put on a jacket. If it's raining, you put on a tarp. And if you need something, you need to ask for it. And it's okay to assert yourself in these kinds of times. So I'm not going to tell you exactly how that climb went in case you do want to read Gorge, or if you end up seeing the movie, but I will tell you that these days, my journeys and my adventures and my accomplishments are more on sea level. They're about creating a life for me and my family. I now have 3 kids, a teenager, a 13-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 5-year-old. And it's about creating a life that allows my kids to deal with the stress of life. Like, we spend a tremendous amount of money on Lush because they make great bath bombs. And so, if there's a stressful thing going on, we talk about that. My 13-year-old loves tea because tea is one of my grounding exercises, of holding a cup of tea, smelling the aroma of the herbal tea, taking a moment to savor its warmth and be present in the world. Because, let's face it, not everybody wants to climb Kilimanjaro, not everybody can. And it's a completely impractical way of coping. So I have had to find ways on the ground level to deal with the stress of life, but also it's really important for me to impart it. I've had to find community. I've been a voice on Binge Eating Connection, which is Eating Recovery Center's forum. And it's been so empowering and so beautiful to be part of this community. When it first started a few years ago, we thought, okay, well, let's create this community. Let's see who shows up, right? Within a few months, we had 130,000 people like the page because it spoke to them. And so we've really reinvigorated to continue that conversation about binge eating disorder. And so I hope you join me there, whether this is something that you are facing, or if you know someone who's facing this, I'd love to see you there. I've realized that our stories show the way. And so whether I'm writing a book or I'm sharing a story like I am today, it's really important. And the most important lesson for me is acknowledging that sharing my story, my truth, is one of the most powerful pillars of my own recovery. And also knowing that one of the gifts of binge eating disorder being in the DSM-5 is knowing that that means that, insurance can cover treatment. There are treatment options available now because now providers can talk to each other, and you can have dietitians and therapists, and everybody's on the same page as your doctor, and you can all kind of speak this common language. But also what's beautiful about that is that places like Eating Recovery Center and treatment centers are also focused on, if somebody's in a larger body, how do they get to treatment? Or how can we serve people? With the caveat that, and I want you to understand, not everybody with binge eating disorder is in a larger body, and not everybody with a larger body has binge eating disorder. But there are a tremendous amount, if somebody's coming to treatment in a larger body like I'm in, there are a lot of considerations to be made about that. But I think the most important thing for you to take away today is that your ending is your new beginning. All of these steps lead me to be able to do things that I love to do, to live a life that is aligned with my values. Coronavirus sure has, this whole lockdown sure has tested my recovery in ways that I never thought were possible. But the thing that keeps me going is thinking about the adventures down the road, the places that I'll end up being, and where we'll go from here.
First of all, thank you. Oh, that was really incredible. You're a storyteller, and you're a beautiful storyteller, and I loved it. I love the inspiration and the learnings behind it. I'm also a kindred spirit. Tea is like at the top of my recovery patchwork is tea. So I totally get that. And yeah, it's really something. I love hearing people's, when you were talking about the going up the mountain, and I just kept kind of listening to what you were saying. And I mean, everything that you talk about in your journey is a story about recovery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Speaking up for yourself, all those things, that witnessing the splendor of nature and the world around you. Like, it's such a beautiful, inspirational story with so much resonance for all of us, regardless of what we may be struggling with in our own lives. So thank you for that. So thank you very much for taking time to be with us here today. Thank you everybody else who joined us, who asked questions, who just was here. And if you require more information, please do reach out to Eating Recovery Center. There's lots of resources, including resources for family members.
Mm-hmm.
They have family groups, and they have a really wonderful education program where they do different webinars all the time that are free to the public, and as well as to clinicians. But I think that you don't turn people away from your webinars, as I see things.
Never, no. It's actually, in fact, the thing about lockdown and COVID is that it's actually broadened how many people we're talking to, which is, it's so great.
Absolutely great.